All right, I think we got about 2 weeks of the series left, but we are in a series where we're talking about learning to live. And what we've been doing, we've just kind of been going through different topics in our life, different areas of our lives that I believe are key areas that determine if you thrive in life or whether you just kind of survive through life. So we've been kind of going through these different areas. Most of them have dealt with internal things inside you. Last week, we kind of talked about money, which is kind of an exterior thing that actually affects you internally. Today, we're going to kind of shift things a little bit as well, and we're going to be talking about parenting and basically how do you raise your kids? How do you raise your kids? Now, the reason this is a major factor I want you to learn about is because it really does determine whether you thrive in life or if you just kind of survive through this life, because how your kids behave in life on a regular basis can either be a constant source of joy or misery. All right? And you've seen this if you look around at families and stuff like that. Kids can be a constant place of joy. They can be a constant point of misery. Now, the book of Proverbs is very clear about how important it is to raise your kids right, and it actually gives you a ton of information about how to raise your kids. Because most of us, when you became parents, you almost feel like, what am I supposed to do? Like, I remember the first time we brought our children home, for a while it was Gideon. First time we brought Gideon home, and I remember my parents left the house, and me and Autumn looked at each other like, how do you make this kid live at night? Like, what do you do to keep him alive? Is he going to die by morning? And I remember being total panic, like what you do. But there really is no rule book. You never feel like you're given anything, except for if you go read Proverbs, you would actually get pretty decent insight on how to raise your kids. Let me just give you some examples of that. Here's some negative things. It talks about if you don't raise your kids well, some of the effects. It says this in 17:1 of Proverbs, chapter 17, verse 1. I love this one. It says, better a dry crust eaten in peace than a house filled with feasting and conflict. All right? So better to just be sitting on your own with crummy food than to actually have a wealth of food and a wealth and everything and have a family that just bickers and goes at each other all the time. All right? The other thing, Proverbs 19:13 says this, a foolish child is a calamity to a father. Okay? A foolish child, a kid who's just not raised well. Proverbs 17:25, foolish children bring grief to their fathers and bitterness to the one who gave them birth. All right, so what we see in Proverbs is this. Your kids can have a dramatic effect on your quality of life and whether you are thriving or surviving. It also says this in Proverbs. Here's a couple positive ones. Proverbs 29:17. Discipline your children, and they will give you peace of mind, and they will make your heart glad. Is that not quite a difference from the first three? All right? Here's another one, 23:24. It says, the father of godly children has cause for joy. What a pleasure to have children who are wise. All right, so again, we see this key concept that how you raise your kids has a direct link to the quality of your life that you live out on a daily basis. In Proverbs 10:1, it says this, a wise child brings joy to a father, and a foolish child brings grief to a mother. And it shows you both ends of it right there. It says, you raise a kid well, it brings gladness to your life. You raise a kid bad, and guess what? It brings, here it says, it brings grief to a mother. Now, in order to raise kids right, you need to understand what your role is as a parent. So that's one of the things a lot of parents struggle with. What is my role? What do I do? What does God want from me as a Christian parent to raise my children? Let me answer that for you this morning and make it very clear for you. Proverbs 13:24, it says this, those who spare the rod of discipline hate their children. Okay? Interesting comment here. Those who spare the rod of discipline, it gives us hate their children. Which means if you don't discipline your children, if you don't try to raise them, you don't put time and effort into it, you're basically admitting you really don't love your kids. And here it even says it's a sign that you hate your kids. And what I think some of that is, you'll learn to resent them. You'll learn to not be happy with them because they'll be a mess. They'll be a disaster, and they will cause a lot of strife in your life. And at some point, you will learn to hate them. And you see this a lot in our culture today that we're living in. In Proverbs 29:17, it says, or going on from there, in verse 24, it says, those who love their children care enough to discipline them. All right? So if you don't discipline them, you hate them. If you do discipline them, it means you care for them. So it shows you how you can tell if you love your kids or if you don't love your kids Do you take the time to discipline them? In Proverbs 29:17, it says this, discipline your children, and they will give you peace of mind and will make your heart glad. Now, here's the thing. It is very key for us to understand what discipline means here, what that is describing. Discipline is not just simply punishing your children when they do wrong. That's where a lot of people get this wrong, is they think, I'm a good parent because I discipline my kid. When they mess up, man, I lay the hammer down. I get the rod out, whatever it is, and I physically punish my kid and I take care of my kid, and that means I'm a good parent. That's a wrong understanding. It's not necessarily a good understanding of what the word discipline here in the scriptures mean. Godly discipline is actually better understood as training. Okay, so when you see that word discipline, you also see the word training with it. That's probably a better description of it. Those who train their kids love their kids. Those who don't train their kids hate their kids, is basically what the Proverbs are saying here. We see this in Ephesians 6, chapter 4. It says this, Paul writes, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger by the way you treat them. Let me tell you what he's hinting towards. He's hinting towards fathers here who think discipline is just punishing my child. Okay? And what he says here is by thinking that's what discipline is, it says you'll make them angry by the way you treat them, that you'll provoke anger in them. They will learn to resent you. All right? But he says rather, bring them up with the discipline and instruction that comes from the Lord, which is where you get this idea of discipline and instruction. It's a training process that you are doing with your children. Proverbs 22:6, it says this, direct your children onto the right path, and when they are older, they will not leave it. So take the time to train your kids in the ways of the Lord, and when they're older, they will not leave it. It's kind of what we get in Proverbs. Now, the weird thing about Proverbs, that does not mean that is a promise for every single child. What it is, it's a rule of thumb, which is in general, you apply this, you get this result. That's what you see in Proverbs. Proverbs is a book kind of telling you the way the world works is the typical way. The rule of thumb is you do this, you get that. You do this, you receive this. And it kind of lays it out. That's what it's telling you. Raise your kids in the Lord, teach them the right path, and when they're older, they will not leave it. So the question we have to answer today is simply this. Where do we focus our training to produce great children? So as parents, where should we spend our time, our focus as parents? Now, if you come to one of my parenting classes, I'll go into much more detail, a lot of different areas. This is a Sunday morning. I give you 3 things here, so I'm going to give you 3 things to focus on. Obviously, there's some more depth and stuff like that you can go into in some different areas. But I'm going to give you 3 highlights today. I would tell you I think are very significant places as parents to focus your time training your children. The first one is this. Focus on being their parent from the moment of birth. And you go, well, that's isn't that just natural? No, it's not, all right? And in our culture we live today, as I tell my Sunday school class, this week at basketball, Tuesday I was playing basketball in here with some of the high school kids, and I had 5 high school kids in here playing with me. 4 of the 5 have never met their dad. Okay, 4 of 5. Other than, I'd say 2 of them said they had met them at some point, like on one day or something, and kind of knew something like about what their name is or something. 4 of the 5 have never met their dad. Is that not amazing? 4 or 5. Guess who the one was that had met their dad? Gideon, my son. He's playing with me. So he's met his dad. We don't ever talk. I don't take time to even communicate. But he does know who I am, and he sees me on a regular basis. The less we talk, the better. So that's just how it works in our life. No. But 4 of 5 guys in there never have met their dad. And I was just sitting there stunned like, this is stunning. This is not good. So when I say to first focus on being a parent from the moment of birth, the simplest form of that is, if you have a kid, be a dad. Okay? If you have a kid, be a mom. Stay with your family, stay with your kids, be there to be a role model for them. Keep your family together at all costs. Do everything you can to keep that family together and be in your kids' life. Now, in Proverbs 19:8, here's what it reads. It says this, discipline your children while there is hope. Otherwise, you will ruin their lives. Okay? Discipline your children while there is hope. Otherwise, you will ruin their lives. What that means is this. From the moment your kids are born, you become a trainer. You are there to train your children. You are there to help guide them in life. You're there to train them in the ways of the Lord and the ways to live their life You are a trainer. You cannot sit around thinking someday I will start to train them, someday I'll be a parent to them, but right now I'm doing my own thing, and then hope someday you're going to re-engage and it's all going to work out for you, all right? We do this a lot of times in our spiritual lives. As a lot of us in our spiritual lives go, someday I'm going to get serious about my spiritual life with God. Someday I'm really going to try to build my relationship with the Lord. And that someday, does it ever get there? No, the someday is always a someday. And you can go years and years and years never refocusing on it, but someday you're going to get there. Same thing happens with parents. Someday I'm actually going to engage and actually be a parent. And it never really happens. And what I want to warn you this morning is this. When puberty hits, if you have not trained your kids already at that point, you have a mess on your hands, because at puberty, everything becomes amplified. So if you're thinking when my kids hit their teenage years, that's when I really have to be a parent, and I hear this one a lot. I did youth ministry for a decade, and I still work with teens quite a bit and stuff like that. I know kids, I know teens, I know families. I can't tell you how many parents I have that have this view, which is I'm just their friend and I hang out with them and they're just my kids, but when they're teenagers, that's when I'm really going to have to crack down and be like a parent to them. And you're going, if that's when you think you have to be a parent and start training them is when they hit teenage years, you've already lost. You have a mess on your hands, and you're already in a losing battle. So when I say here, focus on being a parent from the moment of birth, use their childhood to train them in truth and values and in godly living. Start it from the time they're little. Start teaching them your values, how to live life, how to live a godly life. Start teaching and training them that stuff from the very beginning. Don't just be a disciplinarian. Be someone who's a trainer that uses discipline to help train. Does that make sense? That's the first thing I would tell you to focus on. The second thing I would tell you to focus on is this. Focus training your kids on handling this world, not your world. Now, this next line I did not come up with. I'm paraphrasing the best I remember it. I saw this on Facebook at some point ago, and I was like, that's really a brilliant point. But here's the point they made. If you're raising your children the way you were raised, you're raising them for a world that no longer exists. Okay? I hear so many parents go, well, it worked for me. That's how I was raised, and look how I turned out. It worked for me. Well, you were raised for a different world, and your kids don't live in the world that you were raised for. The world has changed on you. So if you are raising your kids the same way you were raised, guess what? You just raised them for a world that no longer exists in reality. This world is a much different place than the world that you were raised in and a world that you lived in, adults. This society, let me just give you 3 areas where it's drastically changed. This society today is hostile to your Christian values, where it used to be in society it was actually re-emphasized and it was actually encouraged when your kids left you. They got the same message that they got at church and they got at home and everything else, and it was re-emphasized over and over and over and over again. In this world today, guess what? When they leave your home, you have a culture and a society that's actually hostile to your values if you are a Christian home. So they leave and nothing's re-emphasized. Everything's attempted to be torn down from what you've taught them. That is different. So if you're still trying to raise your kids the same way you were raised, back in the day when it was okay not to really talk about your faith a whole lot at home, but let the church take care of it, and they'd hear it at school and they'd hear it out in different parts of the community and all that stuff. If you still think that's going to work and give your kids a strong Christian foundation, you are sorely mistaken. All right? You have to be the number one influencer of your child's faith at home. The church is a supplemental. It can help you along in that journey, but it's got to be at home, because when they leave this building and when they leave your home, everything else in society is anti your values, anti the values of Christ. That's just the nature of the beast. It's what we live in this world today, and it's something we have to get used to and just accept because it is what it is. So you cannot raise your kids the same way you were raised. The second area, it's changed drastically. The internet has brought what I call here the dark world into everybody's view. It's brought the dark world to everyone. Let me tell you what I mean by that. Sexuality. Things that my generation and generations beyond me, things that you might have vaguely heard about 1 or 2 times in your life or read a story in the newspaper about and went, holy cow, that type of stuff happens in the sexual terms. Now is in everybody's house at the click of a button at any time they wanted to see things that you could never even imagine happen in people's bedrooms and happen in a society. The dark world of this society that used to be a handful of people that were in dark rooms in New York or somewhere else, and it was going on, and you're going, it is now in public view. It's at a moment's click. We make movies on it now. What's the 3 movies? What was the one that was geared towards women just recently? Dark, what was that one? 50 Shades of Grey. You had 3 movies. Obviously, you can see I didn't see it. That's good. Your minister didn't go see that, all right? You had that as a public movie with tons of people just going and watching it together publicly. Generations ago, that would have never even been thought of by most people. Your children today have access to things that would blow your mind that they can just click on. And so as a parent, you have to be aware of that, and you have to go, I can't raise my kids the same way I was raised. Back when I was raised, I was left on my own to just kind of run the neighborhood and do my things whenever I wanted, and you could go do stuff, and mom would call and be like, hey, dinner time, and you'd show up at the right times, and you'd eat lunch, and eat dinner, and you'd just go do your life. You can't do that today. Real quick with you can't leave electronics with your children unsupervised without being in front of you. Okay, all the computers in our house are in our downstairs floor in public view of each other, so it takes away some of those temptations. It takes away the ability. The parents who go, oh, I just let my kids go upstairs with their tablets or their laptops and they keep them in their rooms. And so I'm just going, you're just asking for danger because the dark world is right there for a moment's click. All right, and it's very tempting, and our role as parents is to try to understand. I try to at least keep them away from that the best I can. There's limits on that, but at least on my end, I do the best I can to make sure my kids don't have access to that or the temptations don't become overwhelming to them, all right? So that's one of the areas. The other one is violence. The violence your kids can see and play today are things most of our previous generations never thought of unless you were in the military. So guys that were in the military who actually faced combat actually saw some of this type of stuff. Now we make video games, and our kids watch it from the time they are 4 years old. I see kids shooting up in blood and gore and all that stuff all over the place. They get used to it from the time they're 3, 4 years old, seeing people play it. The movies they're watching, the stuff on the internet, the violence they see are things that you can never think of unless you were in certain parts of our society that had to deal with it. And yet our children are exposed to it constantly with a click of a button. All right? We cannot raise them the way we were raised. You have to look for ways to protect your children from some of that stuff. The other area I would say in this internet part is propaganda. Ideas, theories, things like that you go, we would have never have thought of. They can be exposed to it any time. There's different pages on every different thought process that there is in this world, every different theory, different things, political, religious, social, morals, values. They can go read on it and find a group that will tell you this is the best way, this is the way that works, and it's all access to them. You have to be discussing these things with your kids so that you can put a filter in them before they're exposed to it, rather than waiting for them to be exposed to it and then trying to deprogram them and reprogram them. Much harder process. You've all heard me talk about that before. But the internet has changed this generation, and we cannot parent our kids the same way we were parented because that world no longer exists. The next part of this one, social interaction is more digital than it is personal. This is weird. This new generation, they would rather sit 3 spaces from each other and text each other than actually turn to each other and have a conversation. Okay? Those of us that are older than I am, we look at that and go, that's the dumbest thing I've ever seen in my life. Okay? It looks just stupid to you. Let me tell you why they do it. They have no social skills. They have no idea how to engage in conversations with people they don't know. They don't know how to start a conversation, how to carry on a conversation, so they'd rather just text because they know how to do that and it's impersonal. But what I want you to understand is most of your kids' friends are going to be people you never even meet anymore. When we were growing up, if you had friends, like they came to your house, they hung out, as parents you knew who they all were. That's not how it works in the world anymore. They know the kids at school, and when they leave school, they know each other through texting. So guess what? You need to pay attention to what's happening in their digital world, and their texting and stuff like that. It is okay, and it is totally appropriate, parents, to have access to your kids' phones and their social media things and look at them and see what's happening in them, okay? You might be protecting them from really bad people. I would say you are almost being irresponsible if you don't take the time to go do that. Now, do you have to go tell your kids every time you're looking in it? No, okay? We're adults. We're sneaky. We're good at it too. We can go look at things, okay? Nothing wrong with that. At the same time, there's nothing wrong with your kids knowing every password you have, I have. Because if you want to own that equipment, you're going to tell me what the passwords are so I have access to all of it. What you do there is you're just creating boundaries for them to go, everything I type I have to think about my mom and dad might see. That's a good thing for kids to have, to know there might be some other eyes on this stuff because it makes them think things through. But we live in a digital world now. They are a totally different type of generation. They act differently. They interact differently. You cannot raise them the way you were raised or you're going to be in a mess. Okay? Does that make sense? Here's the next part. The third thing that I would tell you to focus on is, this is the most important one, being a Christian for them. Okay, parents, the most important thing you can do, focus on living a Christian life before your kids. Here's what it says in Proverbs 20, verse 7. The godly walk with integrity, and what's it say afterwards? Blessed are who? Are their children who follow them. The godly walk with integrity. Blessed are their children who follow them. Children imitate what they see, not what you say. Okay, get this through your head. Children imitate everything they see, not what you say. They could care less what you have to say. Okay? They imitate what they see. You cannot fool your children. If they see you putting God first, if they see you having an active prayer life, if they see you prioritizing a word of God in your life, they are much more likely to model that same behavior in their life. All right? So they model what they see. They imitate what they see before them, not just your words. And so many parents today think it's what I say to my kids that is the thing that teaches them, that is the thing that molds them and shapes them. No, it isn't. It's they're watching you constantly to see how you treat your wife, how you treat your husband, how you interact with the world, how you live out your Christian faith on a daily basis when you're driving your car, when you're at the store, when you're wherever you are, how you live that out in a practical way. They are watching you constantly. Just a couple little things. I would tell you this is just me speaking on my own personal experience. My personal experience is my own personal experience. But based on my own personal experience, one of the best things that me and Autumn have done with our children is that we pray with them every single night. Okay? One of us prays with them up until probably maybe 8th grade, Gideon. Is that when we stopped praying with you? Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to figure out when we gave up hope on him and we just decided to check out. And then we had the second kid and we went, okay, this one we might turn out right. But maybe around 8th grade or whatever, we let him start doing it on his own and start developing his own prayer life and trust that that will happen, okay? But one of the things we always do, like with Liberty right now, I put her to bed. It was Autumn for probably the last year and a half or so most of the time. Now for the last 3 or 4 months, I've kind of taken over some. But every single night, one of us is going to pray with her. And let me tell you what's unique about it. We pray like normal prayers. We do not have a memorized prayer. Memorized prayer is no good. They don't do anything, okay? What was the lay me down, now I lay me down to sleep, something, something, my soul to keep, blah, 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 blah. Who cares? A kid memorized your prayer. It means nothing. Okay, there, I got that out, all right? I'm just trying to be honest and blunt with you here. They need to see your prayer life. When you pray with them honestly, guess what? They start to figure out the things you care about, the things you're concerned about, the things that are priorities in your life. They get to see that because everything else is before bed, everything else, all the distractions are away, and you're praying, and they get to hear what their mom and their dad actually think and care about. So I can guarantee you, if you were to ask my kids what their dad cares about, one of the first things they would probably tell you is changing people's lives and influencing people for the Lord and for living a good life in front of them and having a good influence in them. Because every single night, somehow in my prayer, that always comes out. Now, the other things that come out is praying for people I know are hurting and things like that when I pray for them. I know we went through, I won't say that because, well, I say it all the time. They saw us go through the whole Kaylee ordeal. So my kids saw that firsthand. Why? Because every single night we were praying for Kaylee, and we were going through the ups and the downs just with our parents and everything else, going through, and they saw the heart of their parents praying for those things as well. They saw us when we were broken. They saw us when we were strong. They saw all those things because we prayed with our children. So it gives them a true sense of what faith is and what a person who relies on Christ is really about through that prayer time, because it's intimate, it's honest, it's not memorized or anything. So if I could tell you one thing to start right now in the life of your kids is if you have younger kids and all, every single night before you put them to bed, pray. And the way we do is we rotate. I pray one night, Liberty prays one night, and we just rotate back and forth, so next night is her prayer. This is the coolest part of being a parent. When you hear their prayers sometimes and you go, I never knew they even thought on that level. Okay? So I'll tell you what, it was somewhere within the last week, so last 7 to 10 days, somewhere right in there, Libby's prayer, so she's an 8-year-old if you don't know her, Libby's prayer for the first time praying with her, Usually her prayers are fairly simple and some of that stuff. This is the first time I heard her say, like, and God, tomorrow I'm going to be around a bunch of kids who don't know you and stuff. Please use me to actually have an impact on them and let me live the life that God wants me to live. And no short term, something like that, like let me be an influence tomorrow and live the life you want me to live. And I was sitting there in my own mind going, sweet, she's learning. She's getting this down. Okay? Is she 9? Oh, crud. I don't know. As I said, I don't talk to my kids except for prayer time each night. Thank you, son. Okay. So if I could give you one thing of advice, that's the one thing of advice I would give you to do is pray with them. It's a great starting point. Here's the thing. If they hear you say one thing but live out another in their life, you have a mess on your hands because you will have no credibility with your kids and you will no longer carry respect from them. So if they hear you say one thing, and this is how we live our life, this is what we're supposed to do, or when we're out at church, this is how I speak, but at home I'm different. If they hear you saying one thing and living out another, I'm just telling you, I've been in this business long enough, worked with teens long enough, you are in a mess when they hit puberty. Because what will happen is this, they have no respect for you, and at that point you have no credibility with them, and so you no longer become a voice in their life. And these are the situations where you see kids are just out of control and mom and dad's going, I don't know what to do. And you talk to the kids and the kids are just going, I don't have to listen to them. I just do whatever I want to do. I don't have to listen to them. And the parents come to me and want solutions. And I have to say to them all the time, you know what? If you're trying to get solutions now, there's not a whole lot I can do for you. And guess what? You have to start praying for someone on the outside to come in to have an influence on them. You need the Dan and Julie's, you need the Stephanies, you need these people because those are going to be people who are giving them the advice they need, hopefully, or the Christy Johnsons, the counselors in school. They're going to become the voices because they've already tuned you out because you've lost your credibility and you've lost your respect with them. So you have to make sure your words and your actions match. If you want to learn to live and thrive in this life and not just survive, you have to put the time, the thought, and the effort into raising your children right. Don't fear this culture. Too many Christians I hear right now fearing this culture and looking at the culture and going, I fear the culture. Don't fear this culture. Just prepare your kids to live in it. That's all you have to do. There's no reason to be afraid of it. Just prepare your kids to live in it. Same way your parents did. You just have to do it differently, knowing what's going on. You cannot hide them from this world. They will be exposed to it no matter what you try to do. So you better train them to live within it with godly values and to be a light in the darkness. Jesus' prayer kind of tells us how he felt about it. Was Jesus viewed us as his children. And he's talking to God. So he's taken his 12 guys. He has trained them for several years about how to be the people of God that he wants them to be Christ followers. He has trained them, and then he's having a prayer shortly before he knows all of his end stuff's going to start. So he goes on for a little bit more ministry, and then shortly after that, it's his crucifixion, all that. But in his prayer, he says this line in the book of John, chapter 17, verse 15, he says, I'm not asking you to take them out of this world, but to keep them safe from the evil one. Even Jesus' prayer for you was not to protect you from everything and isolate you from the world and hide you away. We know from the scriptures he wants you to be a light on the hill. He wants to put you on a pedestal so you shine. That includes our children as well. He didn't want you to be hidden away. He just says here, I'm not asking you to take them out of the world, to protect them, but to keep them safe from the evil one. So parents, what is your role? Your role is to be a trainer. To be a trainer for your children, and guess what? When your time of training is over, then it's time where you just continue to pray for them. And you pray that God protects them from the evil one. That's what you do. And if you train them right, and they're followers of Christ, no matter what they face in this life, whether they die when they're 7 or they die when they're 78 years old, you know you did your job, and you will spend eternity with them in God's presence and eternity in heaven for the rest of eternity. And that brings you comfort knowing you did what you were supposed to do, and you don't have to walk around anymore going, I wonder where my kids are ending up. I wonder what's going to be going on with my kids. Okay? Take the time, the effort, and the energy to raise your kids with a godly upbringing by being a trainer of them from the moment of birth. Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father,